Hello and welcome to My Community, stories of Barbadian communities as told by the people of these communities. I'm Sherwood McCaskey, thanks for joining us. Now, the spotlight falls on a community mentioned in last week's program by John Jackman. And so from Chuckahall in the west, we have moved to Pye Corner in the east. The program is carried by two retired educators, one of them a retired priest. Father Keith Griffith begins with an overarching view of Pye Corner as he places it squarely in perspective.
A rural community in the north of Barbados, blessed with the sea in close proximity, a community in which people live as a family, a spirit of togetherness, caring and sharing, a community which developed because there was an institutional framework to facilitate that. Most important of all would have been the family and the home, the church. By the church, I just don't only mean one church, but the churches, as it were. And then the schools, to give the educational background.
Let's go into more detail of some of the things that people used to do in the Pye Corner and also the Cove Bay area. The Cove Bay is the inlet, as you know, and a lot of people, possibly in Barbados, maybe persons in St. Lucie or to the eastern part of St. Lucie, would know that at one stage, Cove Bay was a fishing area. Sailboats used to come inside there and they used to sell flying fish. And talking to my grandparents, I was raised by my grandparents, they told us, or told me and so forth, that how cheap flying fish used to be. I think you can get about 100 flying fish. I remember saying something like 100 flying fish for a bit. I don't know what that means. But 100 flying fish, maybe just for 10 cents or something like that. So it was a fishing area. In addition to the flying fish, we also had CAs. People used to go out and dive CAs. And when they came in and break the shells, and they never used to put them in grape tree leaves like how it is done certain parts of Barbados. They would put it inside a tin. These tins used to be milk tins, like carnation milk tins, which they would take and run off the edges so that it wouldn't cut you. And they would put the CAs in these tins, and CAs used to be sold very cheap. People used to go to the beach and collect the CAs. And if you were one that wanted to stay home and get your CAs, there was a person who used to come around in the district and sell CAs to you. A name that comes to my mind is a woman by the name of Elmina. Elmina, she's one that used to come around and sell CAs. And not only CAs, people used to pick wilts, counts, lobsters. There was an individual who was very good at diving lobsters. He would even go in the holes where the lobster is and retrieve that lobster and bring it. And so we had lobsters, but when the hotels start taking lobsters, then there was a decrease. People never used to get much lobsters then. So there was lobsters.
There was an outstanding fisherman.
Yes, I didn't mention
Vivian Springer, nickname Galvo. We used to call him the master of the sea. He was gifted naturally, and the sea, as it were, didn't present a challenge to him, whether it was low tide or high tide, whether the waves were high and pounding or gentle and calm. He had a way of maneuvering. Of course, he was a great diver. And in addition to the fish that he would bring from the sea, fishing sometimes standing on the shore or on the rocks and casting his line out and pulling in. There were other times when he would actually go into the water itself and have a way of taking fish out. But he was renowned in another way, that before people were used in the support of oxygen to give them a longer time under the water, he would go under the water, you wonder if he isn't going to come back out. His lungs just seemed to be giving him the energy to keep going and going. And he has a place in the history of Barbados which more people need to know about. When the Deepwater Harbor was opened, we didn't have the oxygen tanks to support the divers, and they wanted a diver who could just try to get to the bottom to see if they could measure the depth. And he was recommended, and he did it. I mean, it was an outstanding achievement. Up to today, people stood amazed at it. And that name needs to be chronicled in the history for the feat that he achieved when the Deepwater Harbor was opened. He used to be used by the police at that time, the Royal Barbados Police Force, in case people were missing at sea. They would use his services to go and retrieve the body. But in addition to that, he used to fish by day and night, and almost used to live at the sea. He would come home, of course, to eat and sleep and do the basic things. He was a natural, gifted fisherman. Fishing was his calling.
I would just like to add one thing about Vivian Springer, in that in the same harbor issue that you were talking about, he told the people that he is going to punch down there, and instead of bringing sand in his hand, he's going to bring sand in his mouth. So when he punched bottom, he went on to take sand with his mouth, and when he come up to the top, he just also and spit it out to the amazement of everybody there. He was indeed a strong swimmer, and as mentioned before, sometimes you thought that something was wrong with him because the time he spent under the water, no human being, you thought, could stay that long in water. And I mentioned already counts and CAs, and there's something that people in the other parishes used to call sea cat. We in St. Lucie, or this part of Barbados, never used to call it sea cat. We used to call it scuttle, a scuttle. And I remember going one time to a fair, or these roadside fairs or that I used to have. And we saw, my brother and I saw some scuttle there. And we were telling the woman, we want some scuttle. And the woman said, huh? And she just didn't know what we were talking about. Somebody was close by, said, the gentleman wants sea cat. So yes, in addition to being a fishing area in which you catch fine fish and you dive CAs and you pick wills and counts and lobsters. And also, yes, we have people that used to fish. People still do that, sometimes fish on the cliff and catch fish. But there's some that used to catch fish by a net. And when I was at school and we were doing a Bible lesson and we heard about Peter and all those casting their nets, it was something vivid to me. I just imagined, because that is what they used to do. They would take the net and pelt it out on the sea, and they would catch something called like frays, pilchards in jats. And the jats is very small already, and they would sell these jats by the tin, by the pint. And they would take these jats, clean them, and sell them to people. And the people would take these frays, and they would make something called fray batter, which is similar to the fish cake, in that instead of having cod fish, you will have frays inside the batter. And that was another delicious dish that we here enjoyed.
What a lesson indeed. Cove Bay as a fishing village? Yes. As we are in the area, Father Keith Griffith regales us with memories of social life and sporting activities here.
In our day, growing up in Pike Corner in the 60s, 70s, 80s, probably a little beyond that, one would just adjacent to Little Bay is a bay called Wakes. And the movement of the water is completely different because of a natural force, how the land has been shaped. But you would get really huge waves coming over around the cliff at Wakes. And without being trained, you just go to the beach, you see what others do and you imitate. We were able to, we learned how to, not only to swim, but then to huddle. You take a board, you cut it and get it the right shape and length rectangular, and you would ride the wave. Today people talk about skiing, but you're going to lie on the board, and that wave, you will ride that wave straight to shore. It's amazing. And of course, the bigger the wave is, the faster it will travel, the more speed. And then people used to do it with skill and art and grace. It was sheer beauty. And persons used to stand amazed. Of course, people who couldn't swim and who didn't understand the sea. Or who used to go to beaches that the waves wouldn't give them the opportunity to manage them in that way, stood amazed. But I'm afraid that is of yesteryear.
Okay.
People now prefer Little Bay rather than Wakes, which is below, because that was considered a little bit dangerous unless you can swim and handle yourself in the waves like that.
He can talk about Wakes, but there was a bay in Rockfield which is called Goat House. And Goat House was the bay for those people who live in Lower Pike Corner, probably Rockfield, that they would go to and do this huddling.
Well, up to today, Wakes Bay has lost the interest that it had, but Little Bay up to today is still considered, in addition to Cove Bay, to a lesser extent, a popular area. Before COVID-19, the tour buses would have been at Little Bay every day, and I would know that they used to pass by my mother's house just in the corner. And the scenic beauty is amazing. I mean, you have a view of the East Coast, you can look to the north, you look to the south, you're overlooking the Atlantic, you have hills, you have the plain, you have the ocean as it were, and but then Little Bay itself is like a little pool formed naturally, so that even little children can go in there and feel safe, even though just a few yards away the waves are pounding to the east. Yet by the time they break on the wall, they lose their power, and you have this little pool, and visitors stand amazed at it. It's a natural pool, but it's not an artificial pool. It's a gift from God. And there it has developed that charm, and people just go at times just to observe it. They don't even go in the water, they just go to observe nature at work and what God has done for us in creation. It is of such that it could never have been man-made. And then there's the blowhole, formed naturally, and at some stage the waves would come in and the water would go under the ground and then spout up in the air. And when you see that against the sunlight, you just have to think about the Creator and say only He could have done something like that. That is Little Bay. It is Little Bay by name, but it's a great bay. Little, but great. And it has attracted people from all over the world, and it continues to be an attraction. And you can enter it free, of course.
I still believe, this is my personal belief, that Cove Bay is the best beach, I mean, it's the best picnic spot you can have in Barbados. Possibly not now, because to get into Cove Bay now is a bit difficult. The road is rough, it's muddy, and sometimes when the rain falls, it's muddy. But it had beautiful trees, like coconut trees, that's lined the way. And sometimes you don't go to the sea, you don't go in bed, but you just go and have a picnic there, and you probably pitch a tent, and you just enjoy the beauty, you enjoy the handiworks of God. And you could stay from Cove Bay and look to the south and see Ragged Point. You can see the whole coastal line. The Cove Bay, I managed one time to go and bathe at Cove Bay, and I was surprised. When I step in the water, it's very deep. One step in the water, and the water was reaching me up to my neck already. And at one stage, a few years ago, there was a fish belonging to the whale family. I'm not so sure what is the name of the fish. Came into Cove Bay, and it was so huge. I remember going on Cove Bay and walking on this fish. It was so huge, walking on this fish. So that will show how deep Cove Bay is, that sometimes a big fish like that can come in. And it came in, and then it went in on the shore, and then it couldn't get back out. So that I would like to add Cove Bay as one of the most beautiful beaches that we have here in Barbados.
The beauty is there, but in recent years, Cove Bay has not been attracting persons in the numbers that it used to, and one can understand why. It is at the end of, more or less, the Cove Plantation, and it's leading onto it is private land, and road access has been a problem. And because of the inability to gain proper access with vehicles, the interest in the bay diminished, because then when it diminished and has not been attracting people as it should, it became a very lonely area, and people would feel rather insecure in that area. And then over a period of time, people have more or less diverted then to River Bay, which is another bay in St. Lucie of national, I would say, importance and interest, and which attracts people, especially on public holidays, for recreation and leisure, and for enjoying all that they can enjoy in the context of the beach. But Cove Bay, just for the natural beauty, if you want to see it, it is worth going to see, but you should go with someone, not just alone. You can go to Little Bay alone, you can go to River Bay alone, but I wouldn't advise one to, if you're so far away from community that you put yourself at risk.
Yeah.
And because of that, and then the facilities that should go for bay of such interest, such as bathroom facilities, they are not there, and hence in this modern day, they are not going to attract people as they would have in the 50s and 60s, because we've come to expect certain things to go with certain,
From fishing, the sea, and other recreational activities, Valence Yearwood now calls attention to mainstream agriculture, and you will learn of hares and the use of the drake heart.
We used to plant lots of sugar cane in Pike Corner and the surrounding districts, and sometimes when the fields do not have sugar cane, they would plant, let's say, ground provisions, such ground provisions as corn, yams, potatoes, edders, and so on. And I could remember years gone by that sometimes when we had a field of potatoes, like slip, we had in Pike Corner, I don't know if in other districts, something called like rabbits or hares, which used to feed on the slips and so forth. And sometimes we had to use the services of a man by the name of Little B. He had a long shotgun, which if you had hares in your field, like at lowland, he would come and shoot the hares for you. So we had ground provisions, as I mentioned before, and corn. But let me go back to the sugar cane. the canes used to be taken to Spring Hall by a dray cart. We had lorries too, but dray carts. And these dray carts used to be pulled by a donkey and a mule. I thought at first they used to be pulled by a horse, but people told me about a mule, because a mule looks similar to a horse. So they used to be pulled by a donkey and a mule. And the story goes that sometimes an individual will leave, possibly in Pike Corner, with little or no canes in his dray cart. The dray cart usually looked like a V. I don't know if you know that, looked like a V. And in those days, a lot of canes used to fall by the wayside. And these people would, as the journey going down to Spring Hall, would take out the loose canes or the ones that dropped by the wayside and put it in the dray cart. Sometimes I suppose that when that person get to Spring Hall, the dray cart used to be full. So sugarcane was a big crop in St. Lucie. And we had another plantation in St. Lucie, which is called Lowland. If you look around, you see lots of what we call mill walls. Yeah. And I gather that factories used to grind their own canes before, but they would take the syrup, what we call syrup, and transport it to the other bigger factories like Spring Hall or Fairfield. So they would grind the cane. I gather also that when the crop season was finished, there used to be a joyful occasion. I can speak about the one that they told me about at Lowland, where people would come and have a very good, jolly well good time. That's how crop over came into being. What the boys used to do in years gone by, used to build what we call trucks. And the reason for building these trucks, they would go around the place where there is cane peeling. I guess you all know what is cane peeling. Cane peeling, and load these things, like how the people load the trucks with cane, load these cane peelings on the truck and carry them home. You know for what reason? The reason was that most of the people used to cook by wood, and they used the cane peeling to help cook. We didn't have at that time like gas stoves and electricity. Electricity only came to Pike Corner possibly in the 70s or something like that, or the 70s, yes. And the people would just use these trucks, build these trucks, go and collect cane peeling, and bring them home for the family in order that they can cook. Which was in turn, again, fun.
Speaking about agriculture, Father Keith Griffith, in presenting his memories of this, he points to many lessons learned which we could all benefit from only if we would take the time to work the land.
Well, there were two kinds of agriculture. There was commercial agriculture, which was ingrained in the plantation system, and that is the system that had to build the economy, especially in the context of a country that relied so heavily on sugar. But in addition, there was homegrown agriculture as well. And if you had a property, a home, and the land around it, it was considered the right and proper thing. And it made good sense anyhow to work this land, to engage in farming, because this farming, the products you get will augment your food supply, reduce your food costs in terms of the village shops, because I'm talking about the era in which we didn't have the supermarkets. And because of the limited income, I mean, if you hear the wages that people worked for in those days. So to augment the food supply is to be able to produce more food to put on the table to feed the family. Yeah. And that was instilled in you by your parents, and you just assisted them in working the land. And to be honest, it didn't, when I look back at it, sometimes it had more fun in it than work. Because first you're outdoor, you're doing things, and you are working with nature, and you get the satisfaction of seeing you put a seed in the ground, and then you begin to see the growth, and then the fruit comes. But in addition to augmenting the food supply for the family, you will share with the members of your family, not in that household or in the community. There was a sharing spirit. It wasn't done so much for commercial purposes. You would have to have a lot of land to think about doing it for commercial purposes, so that your good friends, you will share with them and they will share with you, and that is the spirit. That is no longer there. Instead, the land is now producing grass, and everybody is going to the supermarket and buying everything. But agriculture taught people to make good use of a gift. The land is a gift from God. And if you give somebody, for example, a watch, you would expect them to wear it. God has given us the land, and people leave it there. We pay the price for it. And you shouldn't have to be, you shouldn't see agriculture as just something for people who work on a plantation or engage in agricultural work, but making the best use of what God has given us, and planting and harvesting. That spirit, we need to get that, revive that spirit. It would make a big difference. But there's a concept now that agriculture is for some people and others are above agriculture. And if we could get back to the idea that the land is there for us and use it, we could even, it would even have to improve our health, because we begin to eat more of what is homegrown, and food that we eat today, God knows how many months it has been in refrigeration and all of that, or in storage and all of that. You reap today, you cook today, and you wouldn't be able to consume all the same day, but you preserve some under the cellar or something in your own homegrown situations. And there's a better management of food without all the chemicals and all of these other things that are impairing health.
You could not have put it better, Father Griffith. Very good advice for all food consumers, and that would be all of us. This has been Mind Community's Stories of Pike Corner as told by two of her people. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And to our researchers, I certainly hope that you have been able to come up with at least one topic for which you could carry out further research and document for future generations. The good news at this point, the two gentlemen have kindly consented to be with us next week at the same time to continue this discussion about the social history of Pike Corner and surrounding areas. I'm sure you would be pleased to welcome them again. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time.